Drew here, and this week, this episode of Servant, we saw the conflict between Dorothy and Leanne erupt. And the conflict, that I thought that this season was going to mainly focus on kind of got put on a back burner. The whole conflict between the Turners and the house and the outside world as it starts to creep in, as it tries to threaten the family. This conflict, to me, I feel like a lot of it you're going to have opinions on based on what kind of person you are and what you value in life. I think that Dorothy is all about creating a community, and she's all about making that community happy and having her role in it confirmed. And I think that, that's why the loss of the career that she had was so hard for her, and why she is always trying to control everything in the house and in her environment. On the other hand, you've got Leanne, who I think came off as a very, very traditional type at first. But as the series has gone on, it's become obvious that that's not her natural bent, that she has this strong independent streak, that she really has her own ideals, her own beliefs, and that as she begins to explore who she is and who she wants to be, she finds herself more and more opposed to Dorothy's controlling influence. And I think it's easy to just hate on Dorothy, but I think that she's gone through a lot, for one thing, and I do think that she really is kind of the glue in a lot of ways that holds this dysfunctional family, if you will, together. But you see this episode, I think a lot of people are getting frustrated with Leanne and the way that she's been acting, the way that she's constantly using her powers to make the Turners do things that they don't want to do. And the thing is, though, I can understand this frustration, but she makes this comparison herself when she points out that
it's so funny how controlling you can be. It's almost like Aunt May. See the dangerous pattern here?
So I think that Dorothy is clearly going to control Leanne if Leanne doesn't act out in this way, if she doesn't use her powers. Now, a big question I had this episode, I think people are going to interpret it differently, but my interpretation was that when Dorothy tries to force Leanne to go away to this dance camp, that Leanne was actually going to leave the Turner family, that she decided enough is enough, I'm going to go out and find my own path. But that when Sean started praying, and I don't know if he knows who he's praying to or if it's something that, it's a connection that he's experiencing that he may not even realize. I think there was a very, very meaningful look between Sean and Leanne when he left the house while Vera and Dorothy were talking to Leanne and trying to convince her that this dance camp would be a good thing. I feel that that was that connection between them that I've been noticing increasingly, which has led me to think that, perhaps they're going to have a romantic relationship. But now I'm starting to back off on that because I'm like, I think she's still more interested in Julian, more attached to him in a romantic fashion. And there's a different kind of connection going on with Sean. But I think that the way that this played out, I think it's pretty obvious that she was going to leave. She was trying to decide whether or not she was ready to leave and go on the train and have Toby drive her there. But that she decided to go back once Sean prayed to her. I think some people will interpret it differently. Some people will say she just left just to show the Turners how much power she has, that they don't have Jericho without her. It's possible that's what was going on. I think it's a little bit ambiguous. But what's not ambiguous is where this leaves the Turner family, that Julian and Sean very, very much know that they need Leanne to stay in the picture or Jericho goes away. And something I'm starting to question, this whole show I've been, a fan of this arrangement. I'm like, yes, keep Leanne around, have Jericho be alive again in whatever form this is. It's not really clear what manner of manifestation Jericho is at this point, if he is a physical presence or if it's the ghost of Jericho or what is going on. But I think there's some evidence this episode with the screams around the house to support the idea that Jericho died. Perhaps his body is in that hole in the basement and he's a ghost haunting the Turner family. But it's unclear still. But I think that it's very obvious to Sean and Julian that Leanne is the one that has brought Jericho back to them. And they are finally, I think, in agreement that it's a supernatural thing, that it's not something that has a natural explanation, like, that it's Leanne's baby. They don't believe that anymore. And Sean, who is usually willing to be dutiful and acquiesce to Dorothy and everything, finally stands up and says, no, Leanne stays.
You can't do this.
I would like to apologize on my wife's behalf.
Don't you dare apologize for me.
We would all be very grateful if you would stay for as long as you like.
And at first I interpreted this as a positive development, but on the second thought about it, I realized that, I think this show might be about moving on from loss. And as long as the Turners are in this symbiotic relationship with Leanne, they're not doing that. They're still stuck in the past. They're not acknowledging what has actually happened to them.
You need to face the worst pain that you've ever felt if you honestly want to get better, and I can't help you with that.
I think that this baby is, in a sense, just a cathartic doll like the one that they had at the beginning of the story. Even though it seems to have this physical presence, they feel like they have their child back. I'm starting to be skeptical that they really do. I'm starting to think, no, it's probably not an actual baby. And, and again, if they're dependent on Leanne being in their lives to have this child, is it actually for the best? I think that maybe the best thing for Leanne and the Turners is for her and for them to move on from Jericho. I also was getting House of Usher vibes. I've been getting those for a while, but I was getting them more strongly this episode than ever. And the way that the house, it's always been kind of controlled by Leanne's moods, but the way that it really, really was starting to decay from the basement outward when she left. I think that perhaps this show ends with the house collapsing in on itself and everyone forced to move on. That's just my theory. Otherwise, this episode, I mentioned that I started to suspect, okay, yeah, they're sticking with the Julian and Leanne relationship, I think. And I think that became pretty clear from the way that things broke down between him and Vera, the way that he made it obvious that he didn't really respect her, and the way he exposed her secret that she had given him during their time in their addiction group. But the way that this episode ended, where Leanne told him,
You're both broken. But you don't need to be fixed.
I feel like that's her telling him that she accepts him as he is, and she wants to take care of him and be with him. That's my interpretation of it. And this may not be a healthy relationship either. It's hard to say, but I feel like that's what Leanne is invested in at the moment. Other highlights of the episode, I understand feeling that Leanne is going too far. I think she's going too far, but it's pretty obvious she would be controlled by Dorothy if she didn't, the same way that she was controlled by the cult. And the moment that was really telling to me is when she tells Dorothy, please don't go through my things. And Dorothy, who clearly doesn't want Leanne to take the baby to the park, doesn't want her to date her brother, doesn't want her to do any number of things that Leanne has every right to do as an individual human being, immediately goes and starts looking through her notebook and doesn't respect her privacy. And to me, this is kind of indicative of a lot of the problems with Dorothy, the way that she has this controlling side to her. But again, some of this is understandable. It's totally understandable why she would be upset with Leanne for taking her baby to the park and the homeless people. But nonetheless, I do think overall her behavior has been rather controlling, and Leanne is trying to show her, hey, you can't treat me this way. And again, I do think Leanne takes things too far, and I don't know that this is a healthy relationship for anyone involved, but I still think that it's a complex relationship. I don't think anyone's really to blame for the problems. I think they're all equally to blame. So I thought this was a great episode of Servant. I really enjoyed the intro where they kind of gave us some more development of Sean and what's going on with him and his show. I think in the past, he was so out there for his own interests, that he's afraid to do this show again, and you know that he was encouraged by Leanne to do it, I think is a sign of this connection between them where she's encouraging him to pursue his passions. And I think that there's part of Dorothy that has these pangs of jealousy as this goes on, as Leanne kind of draws attention to.
Well, no matter what happens, you were phenomenal. And we're all very excited for you.
Are you, Dorothy?
Given that she's lost her career at this point. Last thing I would bring up, I mentioned that they kind of put the conflict with the outside world on a back burner for this episode. It seems like it's definitely going to come into play by the end of the season, of course, because Leanne seems to think that their problems are over and can just be ignored now. But that's obviously not the case. And that one image in her notebook is something that hasn't come to pass yet. You know, it's kind of a what on earth is that moment. We'll have to wait and see, but I have a suspicion that that's going to be pretty terrifying whenever it does come into play. Those are my thoughts on this episode of Servant. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know why you hate Leanne, why you love Dorothy, or vice versa. Let me know what you think is going on, if there's some like mythological figure that could explain that drawing in Leanne's notebook. I'm really interested to hear what people thought of this episode. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.